Hey, gorgeous people. Happy Monday morning, August 18th. Welcome to Virgo season 2025. We have the sun moving into Virgo this week, forming up a new moon at 0 degrees Virgo, which has some serious implications for the eclipses next month. We also have all of that squaring Uranus in Gemini. We're going to talk about all of that and more. I'm Alexandra Blair, your fearless host of Nine Lives Astrology, and every week we gather here to talk about art, archetypes, stories, concepts, Gemini ping pong brain bullshit, and drag astrology out of those dusty old textbooks and put it back into the personal mythologies you are already living. We're bringing astrology back into the bones, baby, 1 week at a time. We're going to get into our transits, but first, I want to take a look at some of my favorite comments that I received last week. A lot of you had really interesting comments reflecting on the difference between solar versus lunar styles of manifestation. And it was really interesting to hear everybody's ideas about that. Loud Boom Boom says, I love the notes about manifestation and mindfulness and how it can be approached from a solar or lunar perspective. It's a great reminder to practice thoughtful anchoring in order to move in a direction we find clarity and joy in, rather than simply escaping our way through life's often gnarly waves. Yeah, I totally agree. And I have found, as many of you shared in the comments, that people usually have a very intuitive sense of whether they are more solar or more lunar that is usually reflected in the symbols of their astrology. So many of you also shared with me how it felt to have Mars step into Libra into that grand air trine kite situation. And last week, I reflected on whether or not I kind of thought that the astrology proved that it was the hardest week astrologically of this year or not. I also shared on my Instagram stories quite a passionate monologue about how I haven't forgotten about the Mars Pluto oppositions and how difficult those were for people. A lot of you really took the time to write out and share your stories and your experiences of this grand air trine in the comments. I just wanted to say I read every single one of them, and I really appreciate you all sharing your stories. It adds a lot to my astrological practice, and I fall a little more in love with YouTube as a center for community. I really read every single comment, and I try my best to reply to most of them, and I appreciate you guys so much. At the Moonlit Wolf says, nervous because it sounds like you're speaking a different language to me. I know nothing about astrology. Send help. Well, thank you for being here. And I talk about this a lot in my classes, but astrology is sort of like a spiral path. And there are going to be many times when you're learning that you feel completely in over your head and out of your element. And then often there will be times where you find that things start to make sense and you come back around and you suddenly feel capable of talking about a concept or an idea that you previously had no clue about. When I first started out, I would listen to a lot of astrology podcasts that were all Greek to me. And I felt constantly in over my head, like I was never going to understand all of these terms. And really, what I was doing was trying to catch a stray bullet of a vibe from what was being said and just try to get an impression of what was going to happen to me on that week or through that concept. And that was my entry point. And so if you're here and you feel in over your head, just know that this content is also for you, even if you don't understand every jargon term. But if you're ever confused about a jargon term, please feel free to give me a comment, give me an email, shoot me a DM, and I could try to clear it up for you. All right, let's get into the transits of the week. We have 3 transits this week, and they really are the same transit. The sun moves into Virgo and immediately forms up a square with Uranus in early Gemini, and the moon slides into to form up a new moon at 0 degrees Virgo. Now, this is really interesting because there will actually be 2 new moons in Virgo this month. And here's why that happens. Every sign occupies 30 degrees of the zodiac. 12 signs, 30 degrees each, 360 degrees, a perfect circle. But the moon cycle actually takes about 29.5 degrees. So when we have a new moon at 0 degrees, like we do here, it means that there's going to be another new moon at 29 degrees. This happened last year with full moons in the summer. We had a full moon at 0 degrees Capricorn, followed by another full moon at 29 degrees of Capricorn. Now we're getting these 2 lunations in Virgo. And here's what's special. We start with this lunation, a new moon at 0 degrees Virgo, but the next one that happens at 29 is actually a total lunar eclipse. So this really feels to me straight up, right up front, like a double red underline in a typo in a sentence. Like some teacher is picking through our 5 paragraph essay and is like, yeah, right here is where the mistake is. Double red underline in the sign of Virgo. So, right here, I want everyone to think about where Virgo falls in your chart. Like, what house does Virgo rule? What's your relationship to Virgo? Maybe you have planets there, maybe you don't, but everybody has a Mercury in their chart. Everybody's got a Virgo slice of life, whether or not you have placements there. This is the focus, not just of this lunation, but really of the next 6 weeks of astrology, including the eclipse. Now, I don't want to be sensational. You know that is not what I do here, and there's plenty of room for hope. So please hear what I say and do not catastrophize. But Virgos, particularly, I genuinely think this is a little bit of a time to brace yourself. Here's what I mean by that. Imagine you're fencing, Virgos. You're going to want to stagger your feet. You're going to want to change your posture and you're going to want to brace yourself for what's coming ahead. I'm not saying to catastrophize and I'm not saying it's going to be hideous, but there is some difficult astrology in the next 6 weeks, particularly for Virgos. Now, the rest of the mutables, Pisces, Gemini, Sagittarius, but maybe because of how astrology works, because of the angles, because of the squares and the oppositions, maybe there's some stuff like this in store for the other mutables as well. But particularly that Virgo part of our life is getting the double red underline. There's some typo there that we need to reconcile. So, Virgos, sit straight, keep your center, keep your posture, keep your breath and your wits about you. I'm not saying it's going to wreck you. I am saying this is not the kindest astrology that I've seen. So, here's what I'm feeling about this 0 degree lunation. This really is the opening note. This new moon is squaring Uranus. Uranus is in a position where it is goading and instigating and provoking this new moon energy. And Uranus seems to be saying, think unconventionally, think differently about what you think you know. When this moon cycle comes back around to that second new moon at 29 Virgo, Mercury will be in Virgo, and that new moon eclipse will take place directly opposite Saturn. So we are moving from this new moon at 0 degrees squaring Uranus to a new moon at 29 degrees opposing Saturn with Mercury in Virgo at that point. So whatever's happening here with this first lunation gets significantly harder to ignore once Mercury moves into the sign of its exaltation and its domicile and its little eagle eyes. Whatever is the typo is going to become a lot more obvious, a lot less tenable, a lot more dissonant as the month goes on, which really leads me to believe that this first new moon, gentle, it's not an eclipse, right? This first new moon is an opportunity to handle that situation, to target it. Target it now while you're thinking unconventionally and while you're bracing yourself, because once that eclipse slides to the final anaretic degree of Virgo, conjunct the South Node, opposite Saturn, the stakes are going to get a lot higher. Now, what the fuck am I talking about? So I think one of the most common things I'm really seeing from that Virgo slice of everyone's life is something that my friend Sarah Posh and I talked about in our year ahead workshop, Unlock 2025. We talked about Virgos as needing to integrate or dismiss echoes of their past selves. So Virgos are a mutable sign. They are evolving and shifting and changing, even though they are earthy and grounded. There is that mercurial sense that they are alchemically evolving and changing over time. And we used this beautiful photograph from Andrzej Swiatlik called Daisy, created in 2002, to really encompass that feeling that Virgos might be having, where there are versions of you, previous identities you've had, or roles that you've played that you are going to need to either integrate into your life right now or dismiss. Maybe there's some art practice or some hobby or some habit or some piece of your identity that you have carried and worn for years that is no longer serving you. And you need to either find a way to dismiss it or reintegrate it seamlessly into who you are now. And it can be dismissed artfully and it can be dismissed gracefully. And you can grieve that process, but the work probably must be done. I'm revisiting that movie Groundhog Day a little bit in this Virgo place of our charts. There is some pattern that is repeating and repeating and repeating. And now the typo, the error, the path, the work is becoming pretty clear. And if we take steps here at 0 degrees Virgo to challenge it, then it's not going to become a reckoning when that eclipse comes around later in September. If you don't choose to handle that situation now, it may become a last chance anaretic degree reckoning in September when those eclipses come around. Now, here's another version of what I'm saying. And let me just preface this by saying I love all my Virgo BFFs. All my BFFs are Virgo. We've got Virgo moon Mars, we've got Virgo sun rising, and we've got Virgo moon in the eighth house. Burr. My BFFs are all Virgo women. You know who you are, and I love you with all my heart. But I say that because I know all these babes are listening to what I'm saying with their journals already on their laps, ready to be harder on themselves for not doing whatever piece of work it is that they think needs to be done right now. And for some of you, the lesson that's coming up here is that you actually are not elevating the level of care you offer yourself to the level of care you offer to others. There may be some people pleasing here. There may be some shame tangles and snarls wrapped up in this. There may be some self forgiveness that needs to be done here. So before you run off to be hard on yourselves for this Virgo part of your chart, I also want you guys to think critically about whatever bad habit came to your mind when I said that there's work that needs to be done, or as you're looking for that double red underline in Virgo. Let's all try to be little Aquarian aliens and zoom out to space and look at that habit with impartial eyes. Try to remove the tangles and snarls of shame or self loathing that are tangled around that habit, and tell me if it still feels like a bad habit when you do that. Because if it doesn't, that's not what we're talking about here. And what we're actually talking about is fixing that tangle of shame, or maybe that critical inner monologue, that judgment of yourself that's turned inward. I also want to raise this idea of creating a sacred ritual space to be messy this week. Let's try to make some mistakes on purpose and break the striving for perfect execution. It's time for some of us to break free from perfectionism and see if the world keeps turning when we allow ourselves to make some mistakes. The Virgo part of us has a very strong relationship to discernment because the Virgo's icon, after all, is the sacred no-sayer. It's the virgin. She knows exactly what she wants in her space and what she doesn't. But maybe this new moon in Virgo is a time where you can allow yourselves, through the power of discernment, to create a safe container and whatever kind of permission slip you need to write for yourself to make some mistakes. There's this really cool trend going around I've seen on TikTok where people talk about collecting no's. And the idea is that you go ahead and you put yourself out there and you try to collect 5 no's. But the reality is that more often than not, the universe and other people and the world around you will rearrange itself to say yes to the things that you're asking for. Now, every once in a while, you are going to get a no. But that's the idea of collecting 5 no's a day. All right. And I want everybody with a Virgo part of their chart, that's everyone, to sound off in the comments and let me know about a no they collected, or some mistake they made, or some sacred, ritualized, messy time that they're planning this week. One last thing I want to reflect on is the idea of zero, which is such a threshold. Zero is a liminal space. It is a concept that implies a state, it implies a presence. It is zero, but at the same time, the concept implies nothingness and absence. That's what I want us to all sit and think about here. Virgo is a mutable sign. Even though we think about Virgos as being perfectionists and being earthy and being sort of rigid, Virgo's like every other sign, and maybe even more powerfully than the other mutable signs, because it is the sign of Mercury's exaltation and domicile. It is one of the most liminal places to be in the zodiac. And Virgos, just like the other mutables, have the ability to stand at a threshold and to see out the door to the right and to see out the door to the left, forward and backwards and upwards and downwards, and really hold the tension of that liminal space without needing to quantify it. And so this is my reminder to anyone who needs it that we have that ability in us. And I think it helps to know when it's coming because it helps us to get into that headspace before it happens. And it helps us to be flexible, like a reed moving in the winds of change, rather than some paper thin structure trying to hold out against them. All right, we've reached the point of the show where we talk about how I, as a pagan, animist, astrologer, human lady here on Earth, am going to be using the astrology of this week. So hear me out. I'm thinking this is a really, really good week to do a little bit of cooking. My good friend Serena Camini actually put out this beautiful, incredibly gorgeous book called What We Call Masala. Virgo actually rules my ninth house, which rules, among many other things, foreign cultures and my interaction with them. So I'm actually thrilled to use some of this Cancerian heritage stuff and this Virgo stuff, putting all of it to work in my kitchen, cooking some of these incredible ancestral recipes. Serena has some really beautiful stories. She put her family tree in the book. She has such a way with words, and the photography and art direction of this book is absolutely gorgeous. This book is so perfect because it really blends that earthy, sensory Virgo experience with the alchemy that I think is implied in Mercury's feminine, earthy sign. And cooking is a little bit of alchemy. It definitely is the way Serena writes about it. And she has such a devotion to process and to spice. And the ways that she talks about spice and cooking are almost synesthetic. So that is going to double as my ninth house Virgo ritual and my sacred messy time because I'm sure I'm going to make some mistakes because I'm not very good at following directions, if you can believe it. If you want to do one great British Bake Off technical per day, this is a great week for it. Any editorializing you need to do, editing yourself or others, any double red underlining, if you are a writer, going back and collating information, editing your old journals, this is like a really good time for that. I'm also going to be thinking a little bit about my relationship to travel. Before I was a mom, I traveled all the time. I actually spent more months of the year traveling than I spent at home. And I traveled a lot for work and a lot for fun. And I would take these epic solo camping trips across the United States and rock climb in all kinds of destinations and meet up with friends across the US. And I really miss that part of myself. And I'm trying to figure out how to reintegrate it now that I have a kid and a partner. And now that I'm fettered to my desk as a content creator. So I'm going to do some writing and thinking about that this week with the hopes that by the eclipse time, I have a stronger idea of a flag I can plant. And hopefully, this is one of my past lives that I don't have to dismiss, that I can actually find a way to seamlessly integrate. All right, gorgeous people, you know what that sound means. My coffee is pretty much over, and so the show must be over. That's our week ahead, boys and girls. Virgo, remember, is a mutable sign. And though control may be comfortable, being flexible might actually be more productive this week. So make sure you give yourself a little sacred, messy time, collect some no's, make some mistakes, maybe make some masala with me. But if nothing else, approach this week on your terms so that you can make sure that you are going into eclipse season with a little bit of agency rather than cruising for a reckoning. All right, beautiful people, have a great week, and I'll see you next Monday.